welcome to week 4 as we've been trekking through the New Testament book of Colossians. We're calling it Be a Hard Target for Deception. Now, as we dive in today, I want to start off by asking this question. Who do you secretly love to judge? Who are your favorite people to judge? And if you would say to me, Rick, I don't judge anybody, I would say, come on. I mean, don't we all do it a little bit? I do, and I'll tell you where I tend to judge people at red lights. And I just, listen, I don't understand people sometimes. And if you were at the same red light as me, these are 2 things you could do that would cause me to judge you hard. Number 1, leave an obnoxiously long gap between you and the car in front of you. Just pull forward. What are we doing here? But here's the thing that really just gets me, and I realize I got issues here, but people who cannot turn right at a red light, just go. We're just waiting on you. Would you just go? Now, those are my issues. What are your issues? If you push back the quirkiness and the personal idiosyncrasies and just the silly stuff, what is it that causes you to judge people? Who do you love to judge? Well, let me ask the inverse of it. Who do you hate being judged by? Now, this one might be easier to answer, and it probably comes with less laughter. I mean, who is it for you? You might have somebody in mind right now. It could be a parent, could be a sibling, could be an ex, could be a coworker. For me, it's not one person in particular. It's whenever someone's criticisms come a little too close to my own insecurities. That's when my blood begins to boil. I don't like that. But here's why this is important. This is why I think you need to be able to answer the question, who is it that you hate being judged by? Because it is so incredibly easy when we are judged by other people to simply react instead of responding with intentionality. So what's your go-to move? When you feel judged by somebody else, do you distance yourself from them? Do you battle them? Or do you double down and try to earn approval from them? And since we're talking about judging, let's ask this question too. Who do you have the right to judge? And who has the right to judge you? I think there are a lot of us who just want the answer to this to be very, very simple. And maybe you've achieved a simple answer. Maybe some of us in this room, maybe you watching online, you would say, well, I don't have the right to judge anyone and no one has the right to judge me. That's simple. But isn't it true when it comes to living it out, it's a bit more challenging, isn't it? It's not always easy. Sometimes it gets messy and complicated. And today, I might be overly simplistic. If I am, you have every right to judge me for that. But I want to divide basically 2 approaches to life into 2 broadly encompassing categories. The first one is an irreligious approach to life. And this would be the motto of irreligion. Make your own rules. You do you. You do what you think is best. You do what you think is right. You get to be your own authority. No one has the right to judge you. As a matter of fact, if you make enough of the right kinds of choices and if you stay true to yourself, you'll probably be able to achieve the kind of life that you want. The other approach to life is a religious approach to life. And this would be the motto of religion. Follow the rules. Now, there's a God and you're not it. And if you don't keep the rules, and nobody ever really does, he's going to judge you. And maybe some religious leaders and people in a religious community are going to judge you. But if you do enough of the right things in the right way, you can earn acceptance and you can earn for yourself the kind of life that you really want. And just broadly speaking, the promise of an irreligious approach to life is you will be most free and you will be happiest if you are able to actualize your deepest desires and embrace autonomy. And the promise of a religious approach to life is you will be most free and you will be happiest if you can suppress your deep down wayward desires and submit to authority. Over the course of this series, we've said this every week. It's our series thesis. It's a big theme. Be a hard target for deception. Which one of these approaches is right and which one of these approaches is wrong? Now, they can both be wrong, but they can't both be right. And today I have an agenda. I have an agenda for all of you here. I have an agenda for all of you watching at home. And my agenda is to convince you that they're both wrong. And that there's a third way that's a much better way. And it's not just that these 2 approaches, irreligion and religion, are wrong, but if you try to follow them, they will crush you. And there are many reasons why I believe that, but I only have time to share one with you, and it's this. Irreligion cancels you, and religion cages you. The false promise of an irreligious approach to life is that you get to be your own moral authority. The only problem is it's not true. And not only is it not true, it's never been true. And I'm not saying that as a religious guy. I'm just saying that's the way the world works. The fact of the matter is that everybody gets to pretend to be their own moral authority as long as the majority or people in power or people who have the say-so are willing to tolerate the way that you think and the way that you act and the things that you say. But you never know. You never know when those in power in society or the majority are going to turn on you or change the rules on you. You see, the false promise of an irreligious approach to life is that you get to be your own moral authority and that you can bypass being judged. The truth of the matter is you can't bypass being judged, and you're probably going to be judged mercilessly. And when I talk about irreligion cancels you, some of you guys might think about changing school names and taking down statues and canceling Dr. Seuss and calling for the removal of politicians or celebrities. I don't really want to get into that. This isn't the venue to talk about the rightness or wrongness of those things that are happening today, but I think we should look at it. I think we should observe it and pay attention, and here's why. Because in our society, in our culture, if you do something wrong, with eventually we all will. If you're ever caught or you're exposed, all a religious approach has to offer is this, is to remove you and wipe away any memory of you. No redemption. No forgiveness, no comeback. And it would seem as though a religious approach to life would be very different from that. It would seem that a religious approach to life would take you to a very different place than that. But the irony of all ironies is that a religious approach to life will cause you to end up at basically the same destination as an irreligious approach to life. But along the way, a religious approach to life will lock you in a cage of never-ending rules. And if you can't keep them all, which no one can, if you can't remember them all, which no one can, if you can't live up to them all, which no one can, no forgiveness, no redemption. No comeback. The Apostle Paul wrote a letter to a group of Jesus followers, wrote a letter to a church, people much like you and me, and he was trying to make sure that they remained free from the lies of a religious approach to God and life. He was trying to make sure that they remained free from the tyranny and the enslaving cage of a religious-oriented approach. And so he wrote this. Colossians 2, he says, "Therefore, do not let anyone judge you." Whenever you see a therefore, you should ask the question, what is it there for? It's an indicator that everything you're going to read next is based on what was written right before it. This message today really is a message that's best understood in light of the 2 or 3 messages that came before it. If you were going to start a new series to binge watch on Netflix, if you wanted to, you could start with episode 4. That's fine. That's not wrong. But it would make the most sense if you went back and watched the first few episodes. And if you're just starting today online, that's totally okay. Do yourself a favor and go back and watch the previous messages, and it'll help make sense of what we're going to cover today. The Apostle Paul says, "Therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to religious festivals, or a new moon, or celebration of the Sabbath day." Somebody might say, well, what does he mean we shouldn't let anybody judge us? Does that mean you got to get in someone's face whenever they judge you? Does that mean you have to get hostile with people and make sure they stop judging you if they're trying to judge you? Because that sounds kind of fun and dangerous. He's not saying that at all. He's not putting the responsibility on your shoulders or my shoulders to make sure people don't judge us. What he's saying is don't participate with it. Don't go along with it. Don't give any weight or credence to it. And by all means, do not let judgmental people like this take the lead or have influence or be teachers in your church. Now, I grew up in a church culture, and I grew up basically in churches that got this wrong and got it wrong a lot. And our sanctuary where we would meet, our church met growing up, there was a banner hanging on the wall that said that if you drank any alcohol ever, you could not be a member of the church. You could be a part of us if you ever had a drink. And I grew up thinking, If you ever drink any amount whatsoever for any reason, you are a bad person. You're a bad Christian. That's just the way that I grew up. And I went to a college that basically reinforced that same way of thinking. And I went to seminary in grad school studying to be a pastor. And the seminary that I went to basically had that same kind of thinking. And you had to sign a code of conduct promising you would never drink any amount for whatever reason at all. And if you were a student, you had to sign that. If you were a professor, you had to sign that. And some people might think, well, Rick, what's the harm in a rule like that? I mean, because you're trying to protect people from the dangers of alcoholism or being intoxicated. What's the harm? You might be surprised. One year, I got to do a summer term at Oxford University with a number of professors and students from my seminary. And we went to Oxford, had a great time. I absolutely loved it. But one of the things we discovered when we were there, the church that we would go to, they served communion every Sunday, and it was England, and so the communion was alcohol. It was wine. This put us in an ethical dilemma. Do we break the contract that we signed with our school, or do we break fellowship and friendship with the people who want us to go to church with them? We didn't know what to do. And so our group got together, and this was the decision that was mediated by our professors. It would be rude to go to church and refuse communion. So let's just don't go to church. As if refusing to go to church with people isn't rude. I was losing my mind. Are you kidding me? You mean we have devoted our lives to Jesus, a man whose very first public miracle was turning water into wine, and to show our devotion to him, we're going to refuse to go to church because they drink a thimbleful of wine? Are you kidding me? Now, my goal is to not get anyone in here to drink. That's not the point. If you don't want to drink, don't drink. Maybe it's super wise for you not to drink. Don't do it. My point is this. We should not be in the business of adding extra rules on people. I think Jesus did a pretty good job of coming up with the commands we need to follow. He doesn't need you and me to add to it. And in this church in the city of Colossae, where false teachers were trying to break in, they were trying to get these Jesus followers to go back and have to follow a bunch of stuff that was totally fulfilled out of the Old Covenant that you would find in the Old Testament. So the Apostle Paul wrote this, continuing. He said, those things, those commands from the Old Testament, they are a shadow of things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament. You're not bound to the rules and the regulations, the relationship requirements that you would find expressed there in the Old Covenant. We live in the New Covenant. And one of the best things that a Christian could do for themselves, that you could do for yourself, is understand the difference between Old Covenant and New Covenant. And I don't know if you remember this from last week. We said this: the best lies have the most truth in them. And the things that these false teachers were saying, it had a grain of truth. And it sounded like this: all the Bible, all of God's word it's all God's word, right? It's all inspired. Well, yeah, that's true. Well, if it's all God's word, it's all equally binding, right? I think so. I don't know. This feels like a trick question. The answer is no. It's not all equally binding. And I know some people feel uncomfortable when they hear me say that, and they wonder, is our pastor a heretic? Well, it's not equally binding. And here's how I know you agree with me. You eat bacon. Whenever people want to join our church, no one makes sure that they're circumcised. You've never tried to stone anybody. Some of you might have gotten stoned, but you've never stoned anybody. We know. We just know. We're not under that. Jesus fulfilled it. And he writes this: these are a shadow of the things to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. All the things in the Old Testament, incredibly good. It's all God's word. It's all valuable. It's all good. But it was supposed to point to Jesus. This is why in John chapter 5, Jesus said, everything you read, it all points to me. And Jesus fulfilled it. And now we live inside of a new covenant. In a few weeks, we're going to celebrate Easter. We're going to celebrate what Jesus did on the cross. Can we take a little imagination trip together? Would you guys be willing to do that? Imagine with me, we are standing at the foot of the cross. You are so close. You can hear Jesus gasping for breath. And in the last moments of his life, with his final breath, he says, "It is finished." And imagine that someone says, "Jesus, this is great, but I know what would make this better. I got a few extra rules, and I'm going to dip into some Old Testament stuff and apply that to people now too." That would be insane. And if we were to take all the things that Jesus fulfilled and say people have to follow that too, we'd be saying, "Jesus, what you did is great, but it's not good enough." If we take our preferences, if we take the way that we want people to behave, and we make that a rule that they have to follow to fit in and be good enough, we're saying, "Jesus, what you did is great. It's just not good enough. I need to do a little bit more." And the Apostle Paul, to help us see the danger of that, he wrote this. He says, "Don't let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you." Why did he use this word, disqualify? The thing that makes us good enough is not what we do, it's what Jesus did for us. The thing that makes us righteous and forgiven is not what we do, it's what Jesus did for us. And the Apostle Paul is saying, listen, if you're trying to add to what Jesus did, or you're trying to define yourself and other people by rules, you are disqualifying yourself. You're saying, all right, Jesus didn't get it done, now I got to get it done on my own. He says, such a person also goes into great detail about what they have seen, and they are puffed up with idle notions by their unspiritual mind. And the particular false teaching and lies that the Apostle Paul was talking about probably are different than what we experience. And there were people who were saying you've got to worship angels, you have to keep the Old Testament, you have to worship angels, you have to get all of these festivals right. And there's commentators tell us that there were some people who were even claiming that their own personal worship was so transcendent that they worshiped alongside of angels. I've never heard of anybody say that. So we might not be able to relate to that specific example, but there's some stuff here I think we can relate to. The Apostle Paul is saying, be on guard. Be on guard against people who love to talk about their personal, puffed up religious experience. Be on guard against people who engage in false humility. Be on guard. Don't let them have influence. Don't let them lead. Don't let them teach. He continues, he says this. They have lost connection with the head. This is why this is important. They've lost connection with Jesus. They've lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body is supported and held together by its ligaments and sinews, and grows as God causes it to grow. Since you have died with Christ to the elemental spiritual forces of this world, why, as though you still belong to the world, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. He says, you died with Christ. Just a few minutes ago, we got to celebrate Ashley's baptism. When she went down under the water, it's a way to symbolize, I am dying to my old way of life, and I identify with Jesus' death for me. And come up out of the water, it's a way to say that I am identifying with a new life that Jesus gives. And so the way I used to think, my old allegiances, my old viewpoints, those are gone, and my new life is defined by who Jesus is and what he has done and what he's doing in me, not anything else. And the Apostle Paul is saying, don't go back to that. Be on guard against that. Last week, you might remember we said religion tries to reform from the outside in. The gospel transformed from the inside out. And these people, they were trying to get the ones in the Colossian church to focus on what they had to do instead of focusing on what Jesus does and what Jesus did. And Paul is saying that is dangerous. Be on guard, be a hard target for that kind of deception. These people are making themselves subservient, and they would make you subservient to outdated, unnecessary, extra, useless rules. And then he says something. He says something next that really just punches this way of thinking right in the mouth. He says, these rules, which have to do with things that are all destined to perish with use, are based on merely human commands and teachings. This is not what Jesus is leading you into. He says, such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom. He's saying, I can understand where somebody might be drawn into this. If you feel like your life is out of control and chaotic and you are looking for certainty, you might be drawn in by someone who looks like they have it all together. It has an appearance of wisdom, but it's really foolish, and this is why. Because they have their self-imposed worship, their false humility. He repeats that, so it must be important. and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value. They lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. He's saying these people, their fake humility and their puffed up experiences, and they have all these strict disciplines that border on abuse. But here's the reality. It's not changing them from the inside out. They might be better at hiding this, but it's not gone. For 7 years, we lived in what is the most religious demographic in the United States of America. I mean, it's not even close. In the state of Utah, especially in the Salt Lake Valley. They are great people. We love them. They are well-meaning people, but hands down, the most devout, the most religiously committed people in all of the United States. Would you be surprised to know they're also number one in the nation for some other things? Number one in the nation for teen suicide, twice as high as the number 2 state. Number one in the nation for antidepressant use by women, because this approach to life does not bring joy. Number one in the nation for online pornography subscription. You know why? Because a rules-first, religious-oriented approach to life doesn't do anything to change us. It does not work. And so if someone said, all right, Rick, I want to follow Jesus and I want to live a life that's free of the kinds of things that might hurt me, what would I do? What is a gospel response? This is a gospel response. Instead of creating more rules, cultivate more wisdom. Jesus is the one who created, and because he's creator, he has the right to command, and he has given us some great commands, his good commands. And his commands are an expression of his love to us, and they are boundary markers for us to stay inside of a life of thriving for which he designed for us. I think he did a great job at the commands he came up with. I don't think he needs us to create more. What we need more of is wisdom and understanding of how to joyfully and gratefully live inside of that. And so since the Apostle Paul said these guys have an appearance of wisdom, let's talk for a couple of minutes about what real wisdom might look like. And I want to share with you a concept that might be new for some of us, might be old for others. This concept is an application of wisdom. And I'm talking about the concept of a guardrail. And a guardrail is a standard of behavior that puts distance between you and danger. You know, when you're driving down the road and the road is windy, curvy, or whatever, they put up guardrails. No one wants to hit a guardrail. That's not the goal. But how many of us would rather hit a guardrail than go over the edge? Absolutely. A guardrail is there to keep distance between you and danger. It's there to help us from going over the edge. A guardrail isn't about a new rule. It's not about a new law. It's not about a new command. It's just about, I'm going to give myself a buffer between me and things that can bring hurt in my life. I heard a pastor say this one time. He said, it takes far more energy to recover from a failure than to prevent it. I don't even know how to argue with that. So I say, let's think for a minute what it would look like to add some guardrails to our life. And I'm in debt to other pastors who shared this with me. I'm in debt to pastors like Andy Stanley, but this is ultimately rooted in what the Apostle Paul wrote to another group of Jesus followers in the city of Ephesus. He wrote this. He says, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love. This is 100% about walking in love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. But among you, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. If you remember last week, our response, the one command that we have, is Jesus has done work for us. He's working in us. Our response is to live a life of grateful joy, to respond with thanksgiving. So he says, be very careful. Guardrails are about being careful. Let's be careful. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. So here's the first thing I want us to think about when we think about guardrails. Guardrails aren't about laws, they're about love. If Jesus' commands are his expression of love to me, and it's about ensuring that I stay inside of a life of thriving, I want to follow him, and that's an expression of love. And here's the kicker. My decisions don't just affect me, do they? Your decisions don't just affect you, do they? Your decisions impact many other people. And so getting them right is also an expression of love to others. And when we set up guardrails, when you set up a guardrail, this is not something that you're imposing for other people. It's not a rule that you put on somebody else. This is just something we choose to adopt personally. And if you violate your own guardrail, you haven't sinned. Like if you jump on the other side of your guardrail, all that you've done is you've closed the gap between you and danger. It's not wrong, but it may not be wise. So somebody might ask, okay, how do I know that I got a good one? Or how do I know if I got a bad one? A bad guardrail, they don't provide any protection. Last week, we talked about applying the gospel to an area of temptation, and we used pornography as an example, so let me use guardrails with that as well. Here's a bad guardrail when it comes to pornography. Don't look at it. Well, I would agree that we probably shouldn't. But that guardrail is not going to help you at all. It provides zero protection whatsoever. This might sound weird, but hang with me for a second, okay? If we were to walk outside the service afterwards and so one of you came up to me and said, hey, Rick, I've got some pornography here. You want to look at it? I'd be like, no. It's weird, man. We're at church. Not interested. If you came over to my house later in the week and you said, hey, Rick, no one's around. I'm like, no, I don't want to. But if you left it at my house and it just sat there, and it was just there all the time, I don't know how long it would be, probably sooner than I'd like to admit, but eventually I'm going to be grumpy enough, lonely enough, tired enough, whatever enough, I'm going to look at it. So my just personal guardrail in my life, there are channels on my television that I don't have, not because those channels are wrong. You can have them at your house and that's fine. I'm not going to judge you. I just want a little bit more distance between me and danger. There are some streaming services that I don't have that are fine to have. I just want a little distance between me and my son and my family and danger. And I don't have those guardrails because I'm better than anybody. I have them because I'm not. And if you're thinking, I don't know if I want to give up any freedom. Okay, but what if it's not about that? Guardrails are about retaining freedom, not restricting it. I love Pastor Tim Keller. There are times that he's just able to be clear really quickly. And this is what he says. Freedom is not about the absence of restrictions, but the presence of right restrictions. Who are the freest people you know? Are they the people who never say no to themselves? Or are they the people who have the ability to say no to themselves? The freest people I know are people who can say no to themselves. The freest people I know are also the wisest people that I know. Guardrails may be seasonal and may move with maturity. They're not the kinds of things that we just kind of set it and forget it. In different seasons in life, we might need different guardrails. I had different guardrails when I was dating than the kind of relationship guardrails I have now that I'm married. And over the past couple of decades of being a pastor, I've talked to a bunch of couples who are single and they're dating or they're moving towards engagement or they're engaged and they're just trying to honor Jesus with their relationship. They're trying to do things right in a way that honors Jesus' commands. And whenever I talk to a couple like that, I always say, tell me what your strategy is. And they say, we're just going to try real hard. To which I say, don't care, not impressed. What's your strategy? What guardrails have you set up? And so I'm not going to tell you what guardrails you have to follow, but I will tell you guardrails that I've given to couples over the past 20 years. And if you are a parent of teenagers, you might want to write this down. Here are 3. Feel free to laugh. Never lay down together. All clothes stay on. And if a bathing suit covers it, don't touch it. It's just a guardrail. It's just a guardrail. All clothes stay on, don't lay down together, and if a bathing suit covers it, don't touch it. If you want to honor Jesus and you're single, I would just say, you got to have a guardrail, because trying really, really hard don't work. You might be wondering, okay, Rick, I'm not single. Where do I need to put up guardrails in my life? Well, here's 4 ways to think about it. Any area where a loss of control is possible. Where are some areas where we could lose control in life? Could you lose control financially? Could you lose control sexually? Could you lose control relationally? Could you lose control with your mouth? Could you lose control with your relationship with food or alcohol? There's all kinds of areas where we could lose control. Those are great areas to set up some guardrails. How about any area where there could be harm? If there's something going on in your life that other people found out about it and it would hurt them, put up a guardrail. Any area where could result in regret. Let me ask you, are there areas in your life where you are taking unnecessary risks? Is there any area in your life right now where you're playing with fire? It's a great area to set up a guardrail. Here's the last one. Any area that leads away from delight in Jesus. Our response to him is grateful joy. He has given us new life in him for those who trust in him, and he wants us to simply respond with love and gratitude. And just like in the relationships that are meaningful to you, you have guardrails, you have things that you set up to make sure you stay in tune with that person. I just want guardrails in my life to help me stay in tune with Jesus and the life that he's so generously given. So let me close with this thought. Religion builds cages. Wisdom builds guardrails. Over the course of your life, there are going to be all kinds of people who want to judge you. We can't do anything about that. And over the course of your life, there's probably going to be all kinds of people that you want to judge. You can do something about that. But this is one of the implications of the gospel that I want us to wrap our hearts around this morning. Jesus was judged for us so that we don't have to be. Jesus was condemned for us so we don't have to be. That's what the cross is all about. And I want to invite you to put that front and center in your heart and mind today.